What playoff teams have the personnel or formula which the Jazz can emulate? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. You guys know me now, and I'm excited as always and honored to talk to you on this platform. I'm filling in for David Locke sporadically over the next couple of weeks, and it's the best time of the year, the playoffs, the draft, and it's all things I love and I'm very informed about. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 and soon-to-be 2024 NBA Combine, so I'll keep you informed on the draft circle. But I also follow the Jazz incredibly closely, working for them the past 3 years as a broadcast assistant and statistician. And as a lover of college basketball, NBA basketball, and all things basketball, I'll do my best to give you insights into the differences, nuances of the game, and also bring a unique perspective. And some of the geeky numbers you've become accustomed to, I will bring those as well. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, which prospect would you take? Would you take Rob Dillingham, Reed Sheppard, or Stephon Castle if you were the Utah Jazz? And I'll talk about those guys coming up next. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. I really appreciate it. And we're free and available. And today, I am going to tell you all about Game Time, which is today's sponsor, but I also am going to be purchasing some tickets off of Game Time. And so this is not just a thank you for this sponsor. It is incredibly useful, and I'll tell you all about them coming up soon. So let me tell you about where we're going first. In the first segment, I'll familiarize you with the names and the games of the players that the Jazz could be selecting with either the 8th pick, the 9th pick, the 10th pick, the 4th pick, the 3rd pick, or the 2nd pick, or if the first pick, because those are the only possible options for the Utah Jazz. That is Rob Dillingham, Reed Sheppard, and Stephon Castle. In the second segment, I'll let you know about what I noticed about the teams who won their playoff games and how it can apply to the Jazz as they grow. And in the final segment, I'll identify a team that I believe the Jazz should use to emulate the way their rosters are built. I'll tell you which team they should emulate from the postseason in terms of roster construction and explain how it's possible for the Jazz with this offseason and coming off seasons. And let's dive right in because this is going to be awesome. The Jazz will likely hold a top 10 pick. And in the last episode, I discussed some wings I thought were feasible to be picked at the top of the draft or in the middle of the lottery where the Jazz could be drafting. Danny Ainge said Keontae can play the 1 or the 2, and he's not sold. He's a franchise point guard, which many interpret it as a negative, but that just means he can play the 1 or the 2, and you never really know if you got a franchise point guard. If you do, you're incredibly lucky. So I don't think that's the slight that some think it is. So let's start it off with Rob Dillingham, who is a point guard in his own regard. Rob Dillingham's 6'3", 176 pounds. Dillingham has the best individual creation in this class, gets a shot whenever he wants it, even in college with minimal spacing, though Kentucky shot better than most teams. I think he'll be a pick and roll star, someone who can really create his own shot. And once he gets an advantage of a screen set and spacing around him, will be able to punish defenses in the drop coverage, shooting, or attack the rack because he's lickety split quick. He's someone that you would need to run the offense through. And defensively, he's probably fairly inept, but he's of the ilk of maybe a Trae Young or maybe a watered down Trae Young in the sense that if you put the ball in his hands, your offense has a real shot of being good. He averaged 15 points a game, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, 48 from the field, 44.5 from 3, 79% from the free throw line. So good shooting splits. He's ranked 6th in the Tankathon, big board, and 8th according to the Ringer. He's a dynamic shot maker. He uses shifty change of direction moves to slither wherever he wants. He can get wherever he wants. He's a pull-up jumper. Is it a floater? Is it a step back? Is it sneak around the screen, hostage dribble his way into throwing a lob? He can do it all. He drained nearly half of his catch and shoot threes. He hit 45%, so that's not too crazy to assume, but he can do it both off the dribble or in catch and shoot. He can do it off movement or a set shot. So he passes that torch for me easily, that he'll be able to shoot the ball at the next level. That's something that you question for a lot of guards, not him. I think he'd be unbelievably good off of screens and dribble handoffs if he's paired with a playmaking big or a lob threat. I think he's a skilled playmaker who can make a lot of different passes, lobs, pocket passes, skip passes, live dribble passes, and I think those are all very good. Now, what are the weaknesses? Because I told you a lot of these guys would you say, well, those pros are pretty good. There's going to be some weaknesses. I think he's a weak defender because he's not very big. He's active and he tries hard, but he's not very big and he gets lost off the ball. I think his fundamentals would have to really improve because he's small, so he'll have to be really good at sliding over screens to be one of those kind of smaller defensive pests. He's very slight of frame. He's also, according to some outlets, only measured at 6'1". According to 6 foot, apparently he's 6'3". So he's probably somewhere in between. We'll see where he measures at the combine. But more importantly, he's very slight. He doesn't have a lot of muscle. He weighs 176 pounds, and that's not very big according to the NBA standards. He needs to improve his passing accuracy would be the last one. And I think he needs to get stronger going to the rim, whether it's weight or just finding angles. I think he's a good finisher in terms of the touch he uses, the creating angles off the window. But I think his finishing is something that will be a bit of, I wouldn't say quite a swing skill, but something that will elevate his chances because you don't want to be too overly reliant on touch and floaters, which he has very good touch. But I think he can get all the way to the rim because he's that fast. I like him more and more the more I think about him because my philosophy is draft upside, and in a draft devoid of top-tier talent, I think drafting a guy who could score 20 a game is becoming more and more appealing, and that's the type of guy I think he is. I think you have your system. Once you have him, he can come off screens, distribute, and score. I think he's one of the few players in this draft class capable of scoring 20 pretty quickly in his NBA tenure, and he'll be able to distribute the ball as well. That won't be a foreign concept to him. Next up is Rob's teammate at Kentucky, Reed Sheppard, who many called the top freshman in the country throughout the college basketball season. The duo was very good, ironically enough, off the bench at Kentucky. Sheppard scored 13 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 54% from the field, 53% from three. That is sensational. 84% from the free throw line. And the number that a lot of people point to, 2.5 steals per game. His numbers are great. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Sheppard might be the best shooter in the draft, and he probably is, but he's not a point guard, in my opinion, and he is a pretty small two guard. So that's the question. How much do you buy his point guard upside, or how much faith do you have in the collegiate numbers indicating he's a good defender with 2.5 steals and nearly a block a game? Well, that's a real question. He's ranked 7th on the Ringer, 5th on Tankathon, so in both outlets, slightly above his teammate, Rob Dillingham. Here are his strengths. An excellent shooter with a quick high release and deep range. Kentucky didn't feature him too much off screens, but he showed the capacity to set his feet coming off of curls and knock down jump shots. He makes quick decisions. They describe him as an elite connective playmaker who dishes gorgeous outlets, kick-aheads, and makes rapid decisions in the half court. All of that I agree with. Can he become a lead guard? His ball handling skills are solid, but not to the point where you think he's the point guard. And I think his pick and roll game would have to be really, really impressive to convince a staff to pick him to be the point guard. I do think he's a decent athlete, but he is a below the rim athlete and he's got subpar size. So he'd really have to be able to use the floater and some great footwork in the intermediary game on offense. And defensively, I just don't know if people see him or they look right over him because it's a target hunting game. And if he's your two guard, that means your point guard's got to be a superb defender or you have a pretty lousy defensive backcourt. And I don't mean that as a slight to him. It's just the way that the game is becoming very much, you have to have different players do different things. And we'll get to that later in the episode. I think he needs to improve against ball pressure as well. He gets hounded and pushed away from the ball. And so he lacks the isolation wiggle that makes me think that he could be a superb 1 or a 2. Personally, I wouldn't take him for the Utah Jazz just because I don't think he boasts the point guard ability, and I don't think he's a defensive player at the 2. And I think the Jazz and Keontae with him, they become a little bit redundant with neither having a defined role. I think his shooting's a luxury, but I do think the defense is a little bit of a hoax. I think his anticipation's unbelievable. His hand-eye coordination's very, very good, but it's hard to have that much faith in someone's collegiate stats to tell me he's a good defender when my eyes tell me perimeter-wise I don't think he is. Now there's Stephon Castle, who I think is a really, really good defender. He's from UConn. Many are infatuated with him on Jazz Twitter. He's 6'6", 190 pounds. He's rising on draft boards. He's number 1 on the Ringer, 7th in Tankathon. He averaged just over 11 points per game, just over 4 rebounds per game, 3 assists, 47% from the field, 27 from 3, 76 from the line. Castle stood out in March Madness defending Terrence Shannon, the Elite Eight, who was averaging 28 points per game in Madness, and he shut him down. He also hounded the Purdue guards. So you saw what he could do defensively. Offensively, the question is, can he shoot? Can he play the point guard? He's a guy who sets the tone defensively. He's someone who can slash to the basket. Now, he shot okay in some games. He kind of is streaky. When he shoots well, he shoots well. When he doesn't, he doesn't. Effort is not a concern. He's always engaged defensively on or off the ball. He's got good feel in the pick and roll in his limited usage, finding Donovan Kling and finding Alex Karaban in the pick and pop. He's got a lot of really good coordination qualities in terms of he's athletic, but yeah, he's able to decelerate. He's able to slow down and make smart reads while still being ahead of the defense. He can explode to dunk. You don't see guards have as many dunks as Castle had typically. I think he's got better guard skills than UConn let him advertise. I think he's a good finisher at the rim, and his shot is a question mark. Now, the question is, was he put into a system where he could excel at what he was doing to the point where, oh, well, they have a lot of really good players. They were great. So he has more to show. Probably. But is there also something that says he was maximized beautifully? So this is the role you should play him in, but you're not drafting him that if you're drafting him in the top 10. That's also possible and maybe even probable, but they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. His biggest weakness is his shot. He shot under 70% in free throws in high school, and as you saw, under 30% from 3 as a freshman at UConn. He doesn't have quite the calling card. His game's not distinctive. At one thing's great. He's not a great shooter. He's not a great playmaker, and often guards are that. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Anthony Black in the sense that Anthony Black had a lot of similar traits last year. And so far, he hasn't found a great role on the Magic. That said, the Magic are in the playoffs, so it's harder for a rookie to excel on that type of team, which has a lot of pieces to make it to the postseason. Castle's a bit polarizing because how many players can be the guy if they can't shoot? That's my question. Is he that type of athlete that he can make do with it? I don't know. I'm somewhere in between on the consensus because the rankings, I would say, don't align with the way I see it. I think Dillingham would be my highest, then Castle, then Sheppard, but I reserve the right to change that should I see fit later upon more evaluation. And I'll tell you about that in future episodes. Coming up next, I'll tell you about what I'm thinking about for the Utah Jazz and how they can build their roster. I watched all of the playoff games in the first game ones, and I'll tell you what I observed about the playoff teams who won their games and how it can apply to the Jazz's ascension. But first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure if your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game. Pull off some of my bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go. That lets you compete with your friends, gets you the most riches and the biggest empire. It's Monopoly. It's the same good old Monopoly that you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. And there's so much more to do. I love Monopoly as a little kid, and I'm back on the Monopoly Go train. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. They're different, so you don't have to play on the same old board where you can have the same strategy, or someone that annoys you has the same strategy and you can't seem to beat them. So that's not a worry here. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can do all of the above on Monopoly Go. You can even work with your friends to crack open a community chest, and in the tournaments, get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go. Now free on the App Store or Google Play. Speaking of game faces and games in general, have you ever had the privilege of going to sports games and you're like, man, this is an awesome experience, and then you don't have it again? Well, no need to worry about that, because you won't have trouble getting tickets, whether they were too expensive or hard to purchase. You won't have that issue on Game Time. And I know I've had that issue, but I no longer face that issue. So fret not with Game Time. If you're into baseball like I am, Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and even easier. Prices on Game Time app actually go down with the closer it gets to first pitch. That's awesome. It also has killer last-minute deals, all-in prices from views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. When I attend the Combine in Chicago, I am planning on getting tickets to a White Sox game, just figuring out which day, and I'm doing it on Game Time. I've already perused it a little bit, and I'll be sure to view the exact seat, where I'm going to be in the ballpark, and make sure that the tickets are exactly what I want, because Game Time allows me to do all of that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time app today and get yourself some last-minute deals, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here. And also, are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Like, you leave it on after the playoffs and you're like, man, I got to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news from informed hosts on every team. Stream 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Alrighty, playoff time is here, and if you're like me, which I assume many of you are if you're listening to this, you watched a ton of playoff basketball this weekend. I'm going to share my takeaways from multiple teams who won their game ones and how these thoughts can apply to the Utah Jazz. Let's start with some divisional rivals who impressed me. The Timberwolves and Nuggets, two of the best teams in basketball. OKC obviously had the 1 seed, but these two teams, I think, have some similarities to the Utah Jazz. As constructed, obviously, they're in a different place. Their front courts are massive, which allows them defensive grace, making up for mistakes with size and rebounding dominance. By the way, of day one of the NBA playoffs, the winners of the playoff games were +9 in rebounds. That was the Denver Nuggets over the Los Angeles Lakers. +22 in rebounds, the New York Knicks over the 76ers. +24 in rebounds, the Timberwolves over the Phoenix Suns. And +14 in rebounds, the Cavs over the Magic. Okay, rebounding matters. You know what helps rebounding? Size. All of those teams have great size. In the T-Wolves case, defensively, they have 3 excellent players, and they get away with 2 non-shooters in their front court due to the sheer excellence defensively of both of those players. That's Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert. I don't need to tell you guys too much about Rudy Gobert and how good he is defensively, but I think there's an argument that the way that the Timberwolves are using him is making him an even better defensive player, not as impactful because he was the system for the Utah Jazz, but the Timberwolves have better other defenders, and it's allowing Gobert to shine in ways that he could not for the Jazz. So McDaniels and Gobert, though they can't shoot, are vital on defense, and that's what's helping them. They also have a premier shooting big man in Cat, who makes up for defensive shortcomings with size and being offensively great. The Nuggets, in the case of their team, they have Jokic, who is great, and they get a great shot in every possession. But what I want to harp on is their defensive makeup around Jokic being filled with long, twitchy, and switchy defenders who rebound and run. In the case of Michael Porter Jr. is not naturally great on D. As you guys know, the Jazz tried to exploit him many, many times, but he's improved on that end. But he also has the size to influence the game on that end, and he's gotten way better rebounding, cleaning up the glass, and not to mention he's one of the best shooters in the NBA. All these teams have hit on late-round picks. That's another thing I want to emphasize, who help in the short term on a rookie deal, being useful in the short term and in the long term, which helps you have quality depth around NBA stars. It's becoming vital more and more, especially with the latest CBA agreements, to have 240 minutes of quality. What do I mean by that? There's 48 minutes in a basketball game. 48 times 5 gets you 240. So you need 240 quality minutes, and it becomes more and more important in the NBA regular season to preserve depth. And in the playoffs, you shorten your rotations, but you still need good players to play those minutes, even if the rotation is shortened. Well, these teams have hit on late round picks and have had rookie deals playing in big moments. What I mean by that is the Nuggets have Peyton Watson, the 30th pick of a few years ago, and the 21st pick, Christian Brown, who came out in 2022 along with Peyton Watson. Both of those guys play valuable minutes to supplement the pricier starters for the Denver Nuggets. McDaniels was picked 28th for Minnesota and is an all-NBA defender. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a former Jazzman, was picked 17th, and he's on a rookie deal. And what they do best is hound the Suns' scores. And in both of these series, the T-Wolves and Nuggets have better defenders in the perimeter, a better 240 minutes of complete basketball, and the size to supplement their core players who contribute offensively by doing it defensively. The T-Wolves, aside from brilliance and offense from Anthony Edwards, what stood out to me was their ability to make everything difficult on Durant and Booker and Beal. Namely, Devin Booker had a bad game, but Durant had to hit tough shot after tough shot, and that wears on you. McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker hounded Booker into 5 of 16 shooting, and they took away the threes for Allen and Eric Gordon. Obviously, the Jazz have really struggled guarding Gordon over the years past, but Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon, who are dead-eye shooters, Allen led the NBA in shooting. They combined to shoot 0 of 7 from 3, and that's also not that much volume for those type of guys. They get up a lot of shots, and most teams have to double and get scrambled into rotations. Well, they didn't have to because their individual defense was so good, so they didn't have to compromise their defensive laws, and it led to success for them. Now, let me talk about Calvin Booth of the Nuggets. He's the GM, and he spoke about the importance of not being redundant. Let me expand on that. With more and more punitive luxury tax measures and draft pick restrictions, the new CBA is making it increasingly difficult in the years to come, as well as currently, but especially in the years to come, for high-priced teams to retain homegrown talent, because you have to pay players and fend off other suitors, but you also can't pay other players because there's only so much money you can spend. So it makes trading for acquisitions harder. It makes hitting on draft picks and having good players early in their career more and more important. The Nuggets are paid over the $136 million salary cap with their starters. They're a little bit over that. I want to say they're about $150 million between their starters. Thus, the Nuggets must focus on the middle and the bottom of their roster, where this is where Christian Brown and Peyton Watson matter so much. Booth's philosophy is built on 4 key pillars: basketball IQ, character, positional size, and the absence of skill deficiencies. All of the Nuggets apparently must reach 3 of the 4 to even be considered to make the roster. Quoting an article written about Booth's thoughts, a wing must be able to defend multiple positions. A center must be able to rebound. So at 6'10", it was especially vital for Porter to improve as a defender and a rebounder, which he has because he fits as a wing and a rebounder. It's very helpful in all aspects. As I told you, it makes you a lot better. If Porter didn't improve those, he would perform like a guard, and that would be considered a positional weak spot. The Denver Nuggets do not have those. Redundancy factors in as the 5 players having different skill sets from one another complement one another. And if you don't, and it overlaps, you cause chinks in the armor of your team. The Jazz have lacked this in recent years, and furthermore, very good other teams have as well. Booth noted that the Clippers with CP3 and Blake were redundant in the sense that Blake and DeAndre Jordan didn't space, and CP3 and Redick attacked in the same spaces, and both were relatively undersized. The Jazz have only 1.5 perimeter defenders on their roster, much less in just a starting lineup. And then Kessler is the only true rim protector. The one defender with good size is still, I would say, a half in terms of perimeter defense. That's Chris Dunn and Taylor Hendricks. Hendricks has the perimeter size, but his defense is more on potential than what it has been so far. As early in the season, the Jazz could only play zone with Taylor Hendricks in the game. He's made significant strides, and he will become a full-on good defender, but I have to make the actual point and not be blinded by being a homer, which I am. So I think Hendricks is watching film of McDaniels. In fact, I know he is, and Dunn likely only figures into the short-term future. So the Jazz need to find more positionally positives as a defensive unit. The Jazz do have a big front court, though, and rebound very well, which is why I mentioned the teams with sizable front lines as ones I think the Jazz should try to emulate. The Jazz, however, only have one shooter who started in the front court, and 2 of the starters overlapped so much so, Collins and Kessler, they had to be separated into different roles because they did not play well together, as neither are true shooters and both play as 5s on offense. It's interesting. That's a very interesting thing in terms of the Jazz. I'm curious to see how they go forward. I think Collins will be on the trading block, and Kessler needs to gain some positive thoughts. I think he was hard on himself this year. Now, if the Jazz go to Hendricks, Markkanen, and Kessler, they fit better per Booth's rule. So now how can the Jazz complement Sexton and Keontae, or one or the other, because the pairing in that regard is redundant, because the Jazz have a streaky shooter in Keontae who's good with the ball, and Sexton's good with the ball. I think Sexton's probably a 6-man, so you can maybe go with a bigger guard to complement Keontae and have Sexton to be a scorer off the bench. That's possible. Could it be through the draft with one of the players I mentioned above, or via trade? What other teams' build is attainable for the Utah Jazz using these principles? Find out next on Locked On Jazz. But let me tell you a little bit about Prize Picks first, because this is really interesting about how to build a team, and something I'm very passionate about. So Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. Just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. I've used it for baseball plenty of times, and the playoffs are here for basketball, so you should use it on the NBA playoffs or the early season in the MLB. If you think you got to jump saying, oh, this guy's going to perform really well might as well make those decisions and try to win some money on Prize Picks. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players can take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn 10 into 1,000 with basketball, hockey, baseball, and more on Prize Picks right now. America's #1 fantasy sports app. You can pick Jokic over 11 rebounds or Kevin Durant over on points and make money if they achieve those feats. It makes watching this series even better. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's Locked On NBA. Also, let me tell you about Murdoch Chevy. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy is the equivalence of America. Like you think of America and you see a big truck in a movie, it's a Chevy. We all know it. It located in Woods Cross and Logan. The great lineup of Chevy trucks featuring the Colorado and the Silverado are all available. And go to the website to see the latest deals and make sure you're going to see the deals are updated and the what's in stock will all be on the website. So you don't have to go there and say, oh man, the car that I wanted isn't here. You'll know if you go to the websites. They're beautifully maintained by the people at Chevy in both of those locations. Their inventory is listed online. And the amazing lineup of SUVs are also something you can look at Murdoch Chevy, featuring the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, and the Trax. And they're great people. You talk to them. They're big Jazz fans. You tell them you listen to Locked On Jazz, and everything goes well. So get yourself a Murdoch Chevy as soon as possible and let us know what you think of the car. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. And I want to tell you a team I think the Jazz can emulate with the core as is right now and how they can achieve the emulation to reach the playoffs, just like this team who is in the playoffs, and compete while still using the principles spoken about in the previous segment that were articulated by the Nuggets GM, Calvin Booth. So those principles are basketball IQ, character, positional size, and the absence of skill deficiencies. All of the Nuggets players apparently must have 3 of the 4. There cannot be overlaps between players causing redundancies and shortcomings elsewhere. But the Jazz cannot emulate the Nuggets because they don't have the best player in the NBA, and they don't have a player in that is the best player in the NBA who scores, rebounds, and assists at a level that's unmatched. But the idea of filling 240 minutes well with depth in the CBA is something that the Jazz were starting to do well, even in this season where the Jazz are picky in the lottery. The Jazz kind of started to figure that out, knowing that, hey, we don't really have the star players you can afford to have not great depth around. Well, the Jazz, when they went on their best stretch of the season, winning 15 of 19 games, they had 0 drop-off from the first 5 to the next 5. So they had 10 players playing big minutes, and their second unit typically would win games. And the Jazz can improve their depth because they have the luxury of having picks, and picks lead to trade chips. So you can improve your depth. You may not be able to get a star. You can, but you may not be able to get a star. But this young team can improve their depth by finding players that are on low contracts but can contribute, that may have priced themselves out of teams with stars because the stars cost so much. The Jazz have the draft picks to stay cheap and already have the contracts that are tame. Obviously, Lauri Markkanen, likely if he comes back to the Jazz, will get paid this offseason, and the Jazz could still get another player. But I think the Jazz will be able to fill their team with rookie deals and develop internally while making their top 10 very good as opposed to their top 5 among the upper echelon of the NBA, which is harder to do without a true tier 1 superstar. So the team that I think the Jazz could emulate is an interesting one because I don't think they're quite there in terms of contention yet, but they're ahead of schedule in terms of where you may have thought they were. The Jazz should find their way into higher picks next year in what is a loaded class. I think that's the key, that the Jazz needs to be patient one more year, whether they keep Lauri Markkanen, which I think they will, or not. The Jazz need to find their way into a high pick next year and try to get their tier 1 star to be. Well, the team that's done this recently and has turned the corner and become a playoff team since doing so is the Orlando Magic, who got the #1 pick a few seasons ago, found their guy in Paolo Banchero, have tremendous size defensively, have interior rim protection, 2 wing scorers, and blooming guards. However, the Magic are redundant. They are incredibly redundant in the backcourt with the lack of shooting from their guards, because their guards are very geared toward defense. So that fails in Calvin Booth's philosophy. And I think that's where the Magic will have to thin their troops. They find which guard fits best and fits best with the timeline of Banchero and Wagner, and then find another guard that will be helpful toward their goal of winning a championship, as opposed to having so many guards that fill similar roles. Suggs and Black, for instance, have very similar skill sets. I think Cole Anthony is a little too small to play a 2 guard, but he's not a point guard. So maybe that thins him out, or maybe he's relegated to the bench. Markelle Fultz has been there, but maybe doesn't fit the timeline as well as some of the others. So you see where Calvin Booth's onto something. You have to have players that don't overlap, which then causes deficiencies in different areas. So the Jazz can do so. They can draft someone different from Keontae this year, bring in more ready-made depth pieces perhaps in the trade market, and then you find teams that you find your way into having a solid team that has very few chinks in the armor in terms of skill sets. They will have a playmaker and someone who can score in the backcourt, presumably in Keontae. Maybe you have a guy who's bigger like Stephon Castle, and you have a defensive ace in the backcourt. Then you have Hendricks, Markkanen, and Kessler. That's already improving, but there's still more picks to be had by the Jazz that you can help improve the depth of with firming up their rotations and getting older. That's something that Calvin Booth spoke of drafting older players because they're more ready to contribute sooner. And with the CBA, you need to have more players ready to contribute sooner, because you can't pay veterans at the same way teams did when there was dynasties. The Warriors, the way they filled their team is no longer sustainable. Back to the Magic. The Magic are a top 5 seed this year, and they will get better. Furthermore, strengthening the case of the bench being vital, the Magic averaged 37 points per game off the bench. That's 11th most in the NBA. The Magic bench players had a better net rating than their starters, strengthening the idea that depth and quality of depth wins, but you need size in a star too. Lowry can be Franz, but paid more because he'll be ahead in terms of their NBA contracts. Franz will get paid soon, but the Jazz need a franchise-altering talent like Banchero. Franz is a really good player. Lowry and Franz were picked in the same vein. Lowry was 7th, Franz is 8th, but Banchero is what makes the Magic go. The Jazz need to find their way to get their star. The blueprints are there, and the Jazz must make critical decisions on how to build in the next 2 years while still affordable for most of their young talents and while they still have assets. I think the Jazz should chase this next season of trying to get a star, whether it's Cooper Flagg, whether it's Isaiah Evans, whether it's Ace Bailey, Ron Harper. There is a plethora of players that I think can alter the tenor of a franchise, and it's doable for small market teams. The Nuggets aren't a particularly big market. They got very lucky finding Jokic where they found him, but it's been done before. With Orlando, they found themselves Dwight Howard years ago, built around him. The Spurs with Tim Duncan are the main attraction of a small market, finding a guy, you build around him, and you find sustained success. Yes, you may fear that other teams will poach for your players, because part of what I spoke about with the Nuggets is that paying your players becomes harder and harder to have homegrown stars, and you have to win well on rookie deals. Well, if you get the stars, the all-time stars, which is what you have the chance to do if you get a top-end pick and you commit to it early in a season, you can build the team better by having a more defined idea. And I think Danny Ainge is leaning towards that, or bringing in a real star with what he called big game hunting. Other examples of success from teams that are small markets is LeBron and the Cavaliers, the Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki. There's plenty more of these. Victor Wembanyama will do this for the Spurs. So you need to get a top end pick and build around those players. I look forward to be back with you guys next week, or excuse me, not next week, tomorrow with Richard Stamen. It's going to be a draft centric episode, and we'll talk about some of those guys that maybe he deems can change the franchise with their talent. I don't think there's too many in this year's class. There are for plenty next year. I think the Jazz need to follow what the Magic have done, find themselves with a top tier pick in the upper echelon, top 5, maybe next year where there's a loaded class, support with players that are on rookie deals, and find your way up with defensively oriented bigs and wings that can score. Versatility is the name of the game. You need to have few deficiencies and few overlapping parts, allowing your team versatility, position to position. All positions can defend, all positions can score, and that's how you build a winning basketball team in a small market. So Richard Stayman will join me tomorrow. I look forward to it. We're going to talk about a lot of draft possibilities for the Jazz. Should the Jazz get 1? What will they do? Should the Jazz draft at 8? What should they do? Richard's really good at what he does, so make sure to listen to that. And I'll be back with you guys then as well, and I can't wait. But speaking of great Locked On host and Richard, Locked On has launched the first ever sports channel 24/7 streaming on YouTube, and it's now also available on Amazon Fire TV and in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories in sports on the daily basis with the local experts of Locked On Plus, our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, that's it from Locked On Jazz. It's been a pleasure being back with you. I can't wait for tomorrow, where we talk more about building the Jazz into the power we all want it to be through the draft with Richard Stayman. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back tomorrow on Locked On Jazz.